A dog is a man's best friend. Actually, dogs are humanity's best friends. But how did this unique relationship come about? And is it mutually beneficial? Modern dogs rely on us, they're humans, for almost everything. We dictate what they eat, how much they eat, when they go outside, how much exercise they get. We're in control of almost every aspect of their well-being. But it wasn't always this way. Thousands of years ago, ancient dogs had a lot of freedom. They could choose what prey they wanted to pursue and what garbage dump they would scavenge from. They could pursue what mates they wanted to reproduce with. Of course, with freedom came risk, and disease, starvation, inclement weather all negatively affected dog populations. But dogs are very resilient and incredibly adaptable. And they did a fantastic job of tracking humans over time. As ancient civilizations multiplied and flourished and spread across the continents, ancestral dogs trotted right along behind. Now, the exact evolutionary path of dogs is actually quite debatable. Most scientists would agree that about 33,000 years ago, dogs branched off from Canis lupus, gray wolves, to become their own subspecies, Canis lupus familiaris, the familiar wolf. And over many, many millennia, dogs have become more and more familiar to us. In fact, scientists go so far as to say that humans and dogs co-evolved as we share 84% of our DNA. Living life close to humans afforded dogs consistent food, water, and shelter, which greatly extended their lifespan. In fact, Aristotle's ancient text, The History of Animals, contends that dogs lived up to 20 years after they assumed domestication. And as they were becoming domesticated, they ended up not only bonding with people, but they ended up having a deeper relationship with people. Natural selection of mates was replaced by humans intentionally breeding dogs for jobs that would help reduce our workload. We created dogs for hunting purposes, and we created dogs for working lines, and we created dogs for brand new purposes, including companionship. Now, no one really knows at what point along this co-evolutionary journey humans turned to dogs and recognized that they're unbelievable companions, that they're truly best friends. But I suspect this happened very early on. And the deeper our relationship grows with dogs, the more intertwined our lives have become. Now, fast forward several thousand years, during which time barn cats left the barn, migrated to the porch, and then reached their final destination, our couches. And working dogs worked their way right up onto our beds, where they have happily stayed. In fact, research shows that 42% of us sleep with our pets at night. And the vast majority of us that have well-loved pets, we view them as members of our family. But what's so eye-opening to me as a proactive veterinarian is how much humans have impacted animal health in just the last 100 years. So much has happened in such a short period of time that we have geneticists, epidemiologists, and veterinarians all wondering exactly what went down, and most importantly, how do we fix it? Through intensive breeding, humans have created over 200 different breeds of dogs. And DNA testing is a relatively recent gift to the world of canine genetics. Prior to screening for breed flaws, trial and error breeding created a huge population of dogs that were both physically and genetically unwell. Let's look at one example, the precious, very popular pug. Pugs in the late 1800s had enough space on their heads to healthily accommodate all of their facial structures. Modern day pugs do not. We've literally bred the noses off of pugs, and they have recurrent problems with their ears, eyes, nose, and throat. In fact, many pugs have problems breathing, and research shows 1 out of 3 pugs have problems even walking. This is a list of diseases that we can test for with genetic testing in pugs. Just look at the length of the list, don't read the words. And the other list is the list of diseases that we can't test for with pugs. Just look at the length of the list. I could have easily given my example to be really any popular breed: the Golden Retriever, the German Shepherd, the English Bulldog. The premise is this: if we're going to spend money on a purebred puppy, it's critical that we would think about doing all of the DNA testing we possibly could on that breed on both parents. But what do we do about that other list? What do we do about the diseases that we can't screen for? It's critically important that we begin practicing reparative conformation, which means we're partnering with breeders that are intentionally seeking to reduce that list of predispositions for the next generation. But what about those of us that don't buy dogs? What about those of us that rescue? Those of us that pull dogs off the streets, those of us that visit city pounds and humane societies, we're adopting dogs from there because they're homeless, not because they're healthy. Those of you that have saved a life this way know that when you're in that environment, looking at those eyes, the last thing you're thinking about is how resilient their DNA is. Or maybe before you knew any better, you bought a puppy from a pet store, which is a facade for a puppy mill. And what you know now is that you will never have a lifelong relationship with your dog's breeder. And those facilities will never do DNA testing, nor will they ever breed for improved conformation. But we all can have hope from the emerging fields of epigenetics and nutrigenomics. Epigenetics is the study of how the environment impacts gene expression. And we've learned a lot in the last 20 years. For instance, we know that a dog's chemical load in her environment dramatically and negatively affects her DNA. And that's good to know because we can change the environment. Nutrigenomics specifically looks at the relationship of how food affects gene expression. And food can up or down regulate good and bad DNA. And that's also critically important to know and super empowering for me to know as a proactive veterinarian because we have control over what we put in that food bowl. It's interesting because the University of Helsinki Vet School has done great recent studies looking at how nutrigenomics plays into atopy. Atopy is the genetic predisposition for dogs to be terribly itchy, to have allergies. They pooled information from over 8,000 dogs, and some of the information simply validates what many veterinarians know to be true, that many breeds are predisposed to having atopy. Westies, bulldogs, boxers. But it's the results of the food trial that were most interesting to me. 46 Staffordshire Terriers were divided into 2 groups. One group was fed fresh food, or unprocessed food, and the other group was fed processed food, or kibble. Skin biopsies showed that skin gene expression was beneficially altered in the raw-fed group. Their skin immune system defenses were better. If food has the ability to up or down regulate some aspects of disease expression, it would be wise for all of us to think about what we're putting in our own mouths and what we're feeding to everything we love. Over the last 100 years, modernized countries have seen a dramatic increase in the consumption of processed foods for both pets and people. The difference between kids and dogs is that kids usually still have some access to some fresh food on a daily basis, and pets do not. In fact, in this last century, we have created a $75 billion a year pet food industry selling fast food to pet owners. I mean, really fast food. Open the pantry door, dump the food in the bowl, done. And while human medical doctors and human nutritionists are telling all of us, eat less junk food, eat 5 servings of fresh food a day, eat more real, unprocessed whole foods, veterinarians remain the last group of health and wellness professionals recommending just the opposite. We were taught in veterinary school to only recommend highly processed foods for animals their entire life, to never recommend fresh or whole foods. But animals have never eaten that way in the history of ever, until now. 96% of people do exactly what they're told and feed an entirely processed diet to their pets from the time that they wean till the time that they die. But what about that other 4%? That tiny sliver actually represents one of the fastest growing segments of the pet food industry. People buying commercially available frozen fresh food to feed to their pets. This fast-growing group of individuals recognizes that their animals need more than highly processed food to survive. And they're very well aware of the disease epidemics that are plaguing both pets and people. The incidence of diabetes, obesity, and cancer in dogs mirrors that of humans. And this well-researched group of pet parents is looking to use food as medicine to address the myriad of chronic diseases plaguing animals. And every day, more and more pet lovers are choosing to add a little bit of fresh food into that bowl to either help restore health or help prevent disease from occurring. Those same Finnish veterinary researchers recently completed a study on the benefits of fresh food. And what they found was fascinating. Dogs that ate processed food or kibble for their whole lives were then weaned on to raw food for 3 months. And there was an 81% decrease in disease markers in their bloodstream. Likewise, dogs that ate fresh food for their whole lives were weaned on to processed food or kibble for 3 months. And there was a 350% increase in disease markers. That same group of researchers discovered that as little as 20% fresh food added into a bowl of kibble and 20% processed food removed conferred measurable health benefits, which is very exciting for me because most of us can achieve that by just replacing the highly processed treats we buy at the grocery store for our pets for fresh food that we can find in our refrigerator. Now, the difference between unprocessed and processed foods can usually be determined by where it's found in your kitchen and by how long the ingredient label is. Unprocessed foods come from the butcher or the garden and live in the refrigerator or freezer. If they have an ingredient panel, it's incredibly short and you can understand everything on it. Processed foods usually live in the pantry, but most importantly, they have a much longer ingredient panel that may contain words that we can't pronounce or that we don't understand. So the key is read ingredient labels. If you think about it, our pets and our young kids are little proteges. They are reflections of our own lifestyle. And as guardians, it's our responsibility to choose for them because they can't choose for themselves. And when it comes to a lifetime of nutrition, we really need to be thinking about making excellent, wise decisions for everything that we're nourishing. What's really exciting for me about that fast-growing 4% is that it contains a growing number of fresh-feeding veterinarians from around the world. And there are fresh pet food companies popping up around the globe selling nutritionally balanced, species-appropriate foods. When we know better, we can do better. We have the opportunity to shift health in an amazing direction by asking better questions about genetics and making better lifestyle decisions, including what we put in that bowl on a daily basis. Over the last 100 years, we have manipulated so many aspects of a dog's well-being that many dogs are no longer well. And from their perspective, the relationship probably isn't mutually beneficial. And yet, they remain our faithful companions. As more and more guardians commit to intentionally create vibrant health through wise lifestyle choices, I believe that we can look forward to the next 33,000 years of a more healthful coevolution with dogs who truly are humanity's very best friends. Thank you.